Awesome. So welcome. My name is Ed Potasnik. I'm Executive Director with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. I want to thank you for being here tonight. And I know folks are joining. Sometimes they have to call in with their phone. So we're going to give them a minute or so to sort of connect up. But we're really pleased to be here tonight as we talk to Assemblyman and Chairman James Kennedy of the New Jersey Legislature and the Assembly Environment and Solid Waste Committee. And we're going to have a robust conversation about protecting our natural resources and the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Today is May 4th. So for those of you who are Star Trek fans, may the 4th be with you, but also those of you who are fans of the environment. Today, all or many of the single-use plastics are gone out of our normal daily lives, and with it, the challenge of change has come. But it's a pretty cool day to be together with the chairman to talk about the environment on such a really historic day. The strongest single-use plastic bill in the nation goes into effect today, and folks that are going to the stores are bringing their own bags. Some are kicking themselves for forgetting them in their cars, going back to their cars or maybe back to their house. But we'll get used to this, the new normal, and it's going to be better in the long run. So I'm going to pass it over right now to our policy director, Allison McLeod, and she's going to go over some housekeeping, and then I'll come back so we can get started with our conversation. And thanks again for joining us, everyone who's here. Appreciate it.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Ed, and thanks everyone for being with us tonight. My name is Allison McLeod. I'm the policy director here at New Jersey LCV. So what we're going to do tonight, we ask that for the first part of the discussion, you just make sure that you're muted while we have kind of our discussion with the assemblyman. But of course, there is time for you all to ask questions. So as we're talking, if you want to just drop your questions in the chat, we'll have staff monitoring that. So when we open it up for questions, we'll kind of call on you. So if you could just please make sure that your name matches on your Zoom. If you're not sure how to rename yourself, if you hover over the top right, you'll get 3 dots and you can choose rename. So please just make sure you have your name on Zoom. And as a quick reminder, this session is being recorded and we are also live streaming to Facebook.
Super, thanks, Allison. And you know, for all of us that are here, we would be nothing if we didn't work in partnership. It's really important for environmental organizations that work on the ground, as statewide organizations that come together. We look at all the different issues from multiple perspectives and find common ways to move forward. And tonight's event is co-sponsored together with New Jersey LCV, with the American Littoral Society, the Land Conservancy of New Jersey, the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, New Jersey Audubon, the Watershed Institute, as well as the New Jersey Sierra Club. And we couldn't be more happy to have everybody here and together with the chairman. A little bit about New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. We represent Democrats, Republicans, and independents who care about the environment. We help educate the public about environmental issues, and we work with elected officials so that they can take their pro-environment values and put them into action through good, strong laws to protect the clean drinking water that we're economically relying on for so much of the state, for manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, the land in the most densely populated state, with a lot of pressures from development, and of course, our air and our air quality, and you know, what we can do to make sure folks have clean air to breathe and less asthma, cancer, other kinds of ailments. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about the assemblyman, and then we'll start off with some questions. So James Kennedy of Rahway, New Jersey, was elected to the New Jersey State Assembly on November 3rd, 2015. He currently serves, as I mentioned, as chair of the Environment and Solid Waste Committee and as vice chair of the Special Committee on Infrastructure and Natural Resources. He's also a former member of the Tourism and Gaming and Arts Committee and the Oversight, Reform, and Federal Relations Committee. Prior to serving in the Assembly, Mr. Kennedy served as mayor of Rahway from 1991 to 2010. He currently serves on the board of the World Water and Solar Technologies. He's also served on the board of directors at Art Pride and as a commissioner on the Rahway Senior Housing Corporation, on the board of directors of the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in Rahway, and as well as a panelist and delegate to Istanbul, as well as Mexico City, and that was for the World Water Forum. He currently is a principal at Sky Consulting, which focuses its efforts on community development, world water issues, and cultural arts. He's a former owner of Kennedy Jewelers in Rahway, and he represents the 22nd Legislative District, which includes parts of Middlesex County and the town. So if you hear your town here, this is your representative, Denellen, in Somerset County, Greenbrook, North Plainfield, and Union City, Union County, Clark, Fanwood, Linden, Plainfield, Rahway, his hometown, Scotch Plains, and Winfield. And I guess we'll start off the big event and just ask you, tell us a little more. So I gave you your bio, and how did you get your start? Did you just wake up one day and say, I really want to be an elected official? And I've got my sights set on being chair of the Environment Committee and Solid Waste in the New Jersey Assembly, and here's what I'm going to do. Sort of how did that come about?
Well, whole kidding aside, I lived on River Road my whole life, so that was a good start with the environment. In Rahway, came from a family of 7. My father was in the Navy for 23 years, was a Pearl Harbor survivor, and we were all born on different bases around the country. In '53, they decided to move to Rahway, New Jersey, which is where I was born, and I guess they figured maybe after their 5th child, they needed a bigger house. So we moved into Rahway, and I grew up in the town, typical of that time, in the late '50s, the early '60s. Paper boy. I delivered newspapers to just about everybody in Rahway, and when I was running for mayor the first time, if I heard it 1,000 times, you used to be my paper boy. But they didn't realize that my brother before me and my brother after them was also their paper boy. So, it's convoluted. The assumption is that I was all their paper boys, but I couldn't possibly have delivered that many papers in my life. But the truth of it is, I went through the Roy school systems. My wife and I met in the 10th grade. We got married 47 or 8 years ago, and dated for 6 before that. So, I'm a pretty consistent character, I guess. And and I was telling the story a little earlier in high school, I worked somebody once asked me at University of Penn, I was speaking, and they said they noticed on my bio that I was a jeweler, and somebody said, "How did you become a jeweler?" And I said, "For a quarter." And I paused, and I said, "Well, I was working in a soda shop, and a guy came in every day at 4 o'clock reading the newspaper every day, sat in the same seat, ordered the same thing, and by 5 to 4 he was gone." And he said to me one day, are you looking for a job? I said, "I have one." He said, "I pay $1.25. So for a quarter, I became a jeweler. And 40 years later, I retired. And, I guess it brought me some qualities, understanding, just the concept of even being able to look into something and say, how do you determine that's a diamond just by your eyesight is kind of a pretty heady thing in a weird way. But from that, becoming the mayor was just as strange. I was, I was telling the story earlier. My wife and I had a son that was just about 2 years old and had a very rare issue. He needed a heart transplant, and he died at 2 years old in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And at the time, we were selling our house, and my wife didn't want to stay in that house any longer. So we were in the process, and the YMCA, which I sat on the board, had a fire, and a guy died in the fire. And then we found out they didn't pay their insurance policy. So we were personally liable for this, and until we were fortunate for us, not maybe for him, in the sense that he was deemed indigent, and it was $2,800 for a burial, and that was it. So it was a weird way. And at that meeting, I met a young guy who decided he wanted to be a campaign manager, and it was Jim McGreevey. He was 24 years old, and he ran my wife for the Board of Education to get her mind off of things, and she won. And she had taken a sabbatical from teaching at that point. And next thing I know, I was the mayor for the next 20 years. And in my first couple of weeks of office, two things happened. One is they closed down the Rawway water facility because of the exceedant on pollutants. And there was a cease and desist. And the second one was we were in the midst of major protests from environmentalists on waste to energy. They were building a facility in the town, which I kind of inherited. It was in the process long before I was even considered as a candidate. And they lost the election probably over the issue. And I became the governance of that, because it was, it was a signed contract, and it had to be, they built the facility, and, so I became the chairman of it, and, learned a lot about waste to energy, and then water, of course, because of the closure of the water facility. What happened was Suez Environment came in. They were the successful bidders on the project. And so here, I'm at a council meeting, and there's 200 people there yelling about this transfer of the water. And, I was kidding, but I said, well, they made Perrier water, in France. So, maybe it's good that they got the chuckle. But the point of it was we became, we had went through the privatization, and we went through the issues of waste to energy. And I think because of having been through these two very controversial situations, not instigating them, but monitoring them and guiding them through the process, probably is what wound up becoming my chair for the environment. There were two of the most important issues, water and air. And we were kind of baptized through fire. We were kind of thrown into it. So that's really, I didn't go to college. I took a 4-month motorcycle trip, and my father always laughed. I had left for Alaska, and I wound up in Mexico, and he said I made a left instead of a right. But my education has just been on the ground, boots on the ground, doing things, and just picking it up as I went along. And it's been an interesting ride, so to speak. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. It did. It told me. Thank you. So tell me, what was the best thing about being mayor, and what is the best thing about being in the assembly? Well,
I was lucky as a mayor, and let me tell you, when the guy that ran me, Jim McGreevey, was ultimately ran against Christy Todd Whitman, and during that period of time, we were able to, because of these two things that were thrown before me, water and the waste to energy. The advantage that they offered the community was the reduction in taxes, and Whitman was looking for any city that was able to stabilize property taxes for 3 consecutive years, and she had a hard time finding them. And then someone told her there was one city that had stabilized them for 8 consecutive years, which was the city of Rawway during that period of time. And I was actually invited for some award that was withdrawn because then Jim decided to run against her that year. And I guess somebody in the network knew the connection. But, it was kind of a remarkable thing. These two seemingly demonic events were not as terrible as they seemed. The advantage with Suez and the privatization was the city of Rawway could not probably ever have afforded to make the carbon filtrations, the UV, and the purification system cost effectively enough to do that. So it really was prime. Not that every situation should be privatized, but in our case, it was an aged, from the 1800s. The water system was a very old system. The groundwater was all polluted, so it just was not a practical solution for it. So we wound up going in that direction, which gave us a tremendous windfall from the privatization to help balance out our taxes. Now, the trick to it is not to spend everything you got coming in, so we had planned pretty well our future. And then when the state came up and said that each county has to provide for a way to deal with their garbage. Landfilling was, look at garbage is a nasty business. I mean, it's, so much of it was just being buried without protection, dumped in the sea. There were barges going off the coast of New Jersey, just dumping this stuff in the ocean. And so when the waste to energy facility came, it was Union County's solution to it was to build a waste to energy, which was nothing that we had any input in or any direction. It was actually before I was the mayor. So we inherited it, and it turned out to be cost efficient. The garbage rates went down tremendously from $138 to $68 a ton. And when you think of it, you weren't just dumping this. There were protections on there. Nothing's perfect in getting rid of garbage, but it wasn't quite as harmful as what they were already doing with it, dumping it and burying it in the ocean and burying in landfills out in Pennsylvania, or as far as they could truck it. The cost of gasoline and everything else, the pollution that brought, were all problems of the equation. So, that's kind of how I wound up there. And then from those things, we were able to stabilize our property base significantly for a long period of time. And I sat in the office for 20 years until I decided to retire.
So today is the big ban goes into effect, right? So plastic bags no longer available at grocery stores, paper bags as well. You can get those at other things that aren't selling food, like maybe a hardware store or something like that. Tell me a little bit about, the opportunity there is there. I mean, you're talking about, waste and slowing down plastic pollution and the, recycling and sort of this addiction that we've gotten into these single-use plastics that we touch for minutes in a day and then suddenly spend lifetimes, generations, maybe even thousands of years in landfills that New Jersey is really aggressively moving away from, and really what that means for our kids and grandkids. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think if you go back to the beginning, I mean, I joke, but there's some truth to it, and anybody that has seen the movie with Dustin Hoffman, where he uses the famous line "plastics" in The Graduate, there was some truth to that. Plastics were, introduced, extensively in the late 50s and became this, use for everything. There seemed to be an obsession with it, and I don't think anybody ever thought out the long term. What do you do with this stuff now? You can't. It doesn't biodegradably break down the way things, paper bags and other things did. But here we are. I for one, I've been using reusable bags forever. I have refrigerated bags that are, you buy at Acme and you buy 2 of them and they last you forever, and they keep your ice pops don't melt on the way home. I think it's really an educational process at this point where we really need to, I don't think anybody's opposed to, the practical sense of being environmentally sound. It really makes a lot of sense, and it's just a retraining of process. We become such a throwaway business. I mean, it irks me. You see people walking down to take a wrapper off of something and throw it on the street. It's like it's an educational process from early childhood development on up. And I think that we have to spend more time and effort in getting people used to that. You go to Europe and you find, I spent some time in Europe and in Germany and France, and it's second nature, and it's because they have a propriety on it. Priority on it. They tend to teach their children, from an early age that, this is the way you do things, and I think we're getting that slowly, but I think it's not trite. It's an important factor, and I think it should be underscored.
It's interesting because I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, I would go to Dunkin' Donuts. I love Dunkin' Donuts coffee, so to do, and it would
You
be
can get help for that,
I probably can. I only do one cup though, but it would be in this polystyrene cup, and I would take a sip, and I would just taste plastic, and then somehow eventually I got over the plastic, and I still had the beautiful coffee in there, and then they switched over to paper. Right, in advance of any kind of law or something like that, and it is just so much better. And a lot of folks are taking home food in polystyrene clamshell containers, and the French fries are melting in, and who knows if that plastic is sticking on it, likely the steam, etc. And we know there are contaminants in plastic or components that are hazardous, like BPA. A lot of folks say, it's BPA free. Well, BPA used to be in the bottles, and we were ingesting it. It's a carcinogen. It's a problem. So I think not only for our environment, but for us and our health, the move with straws and single-use containers, polystyrene, styrofoam, is going to have long-term health benefits as well. And it's the right thing to do. It is going to be a change. Change is hard, but in the end, we're going to look back and say, we used to do that. Like, what were we thinking at that time? And it's certainly one of those things where, I think there's going to be a lot of applause, but in the meantime, some growing
I think it
pains.
is generational to a degree.
Yeah.
Even my son, he's not so young anymore. He's going to be 40. But I see even his generation looking at things differently, and the younger generations even more so. I have a friend of mine whose son was picking something up and saying, you shouldn't be throwing that out.
Yeah.
So it's taking effect. It's a long-term look at it. It took a long term to become so disturbing. So I think it takes some time, but I think it's moving in the right direction. I think there's a positive move. The environment itself, the environmentalists have created, a sound footing in terms of people, look at it differently now. It's more part of everyday life as opposed to just what some people would think was some flaky idea. It's good sound stuff.
But it takes leadership. And so I want to say thank you for that, because, whenever there's a change, there's going to be pushback, and people are going to be uncomfortable. And unless we stand up to do the right thing, nothing changes. So, people hate change, yet if you don't change, you can't make something better. And I think the legislature has done a tremendous job to see this as a threat like it is, and stand up and set some parameters to help us move in a direction that's more sustainable. I did get some pushback. Dunkin' Donuts cups evidently are lined in plastic, which I didn't know. I mean, I thought that was wax, so paraffin. So I'm not sure exactly. So she says, bring your own cup, which is always the best thing to do, no doubt whatsoever, which is great. So let's switch a little bit to climate change. Hurricane Ida, Superstorm Sandy, two great, memorable, but also devastating storms. We lost a lot of people in Ida recently. We're seeing more intense and frequent storms because of climate change. We are using a lot more fossil fuels. They're producing greenhouse gases, which are causing the planet to warm. And we're seeing, like in the Northeast, more rain and more flooding. That's the thing that really comes up the most. And, hurricanes and tornado warnings, like, who knew of tornado warnings, but they're coming up on our phone more and more. There are a number of things happening in the legislature to move towards sustainable renewable energy, like the offshore wind that's being expanded. Give us a sense, sort of, what you think are some of the things we can look forward to in the future, or what priorities you have in that area through energy efficiency, reducing the energy that we're using, switching to LED light bulbs, more efficient heat, et cetera. And then, what else we might be doing to expand our production of renewable energy, solar, wind, opportunities like that, electric vehicles. I know you sponsored the electric vehicle legislation, which went into effect a number of years ago, electrifying all the buses at New Jersey Transit, making sure we could make them affordable, competitive in the early part of the market with rebates. And those things are all important to reduce the pollution in the air. What else do you see on the horizon? What can we look forward to?
Well, I don't think there's anything that's new in the sense that it hasn't been thought of before. I think the need is probably more, you use Haiti as a great example. I was in Haiti the week after the hurricane, and I brought the first pure water down there. That's how I met World Water and Solar Technology. This company was in Princeton, New Jersey. And Quentin Kelly, the CEO, is an older fella who was in the military, and that was designed for boots on the ground. He wanted to design it initially for providing pure water on a grander scale, but this big contract came from in the military. When we were in Iran and Iraq, you had to provide pure water, to soldiers every day. And so they're required. So this machine was designed for 30,000 gallons of water, which is a brigade. And so it can take the dirtiest water in the world and transform it using solar power only to generate quiet. And these were things that were important in war, but they're important in real life. It was quiet energy, so no one could hear the diesel machines running, and they knew where the enemy was. So the machine was purifying water and providing it to soldiers. And that to me, that was kind of an important. I was intrigued by it, and I thought, why couldn't you use this process on a larger scale, and again, the waste to energy issue, when you think of the environment, you think of all the things. First of all, we overproduce things, and that's just an obsession that, I think people are becoming more conservative in their ways, just by nature. It's a simpler life, I can remember in the days when you had, the paper bags, and you collected them in your closet, and after a while, every so often you'd have to come and get rid of a bunch of plastic or paper bags, even. The reuse of products, I think, is just a basic concept that makes sense, to people. So,
I mean, one of the things we're focused a lot on, I used to be like your wife, I was on the school board before I was on my local town council. And, every day you've got these school buses rumbling through communities. Children are stepping onto them. And I don't know if you remember what it's like to be on a school bus, but when you get on one, you remember very quickly. They have a very distinctive odor. We were sucking in diesel fumes through our little tiny lungs that we're developing, in and out of school, with longer journeys, in some communities than others, becoming filters for the air, quite frankly. And so a number of us at Sierra Club and Environment New Jersey, a number of partners are working to electrify our school buses as quickly as possible. So I saw a question here from Sue Collins, who, I know there's a piece of legislation in the Assembly sponsored by Assemblyman Sterling Stanley on electric school buses. And that's something we want to see get going, so we can, really help to, I want to say, light a fire, sort of get that movement going. These buses are very big, so they have big batteries. So they also can be hooked up vehicle to grid. And in the summer, when it's hot and we need more energy, we can then use the solar we're producing that is stored in the batteries to help and keep other what we call peakered, more dirty power plants from having to go online. So what have you seen in your community with your wife's work as mayor and now in this important position as environment chair, as the opportunity for us to quickly transition away from those diesel dirty buses and keep our kids' lungs safe into the new generation of electric buses? Like, what would we, I think there's about $15 million being posited now into a program. Do you think that's enough? What other steps might we take to help?
It's probably not enough, but it's a start. Look at it, there's an incubation stage in everything that you do, so there you need to start, and you need model programs that actually work and make sense. Electrifying the buses, it's a no-brainer in that respect. There's even police cars, places that have fleets of cars. It makes sense that should be the initial stage. And instead, what's happening is it's kind of creating forward in a backwards way in this sense. I know a lot of people that they get a electric car. You have to put a station in your house, and we're not ready. We're not set up. I mean, the New Jersey Turnpike, for instance, should have if they don't already, have charging stations along the way, and we really need to encourage and advance the network of charging. So it's not, you got a gas station on every good corner, and we need to start transferring some of those gas stations, doing some, cleanup on them. I'm sure many of them are contaminated, but there's an available network that's already in existence that needs to be transferred from fossil fuel to electric vehicles. And I think, New Jersey being one of the densest places on the face of the earth, there's no reason why we can't lead the way in developing that type of network, and I'm very much interested in helping move that along,
And I think there's a number of things already that have happened. I like to always say we can build on the great success. One thing the Assembly and Senate passed and the governor signed into law was a bill that allowed gas stations to put electric charging at their facility without having to go through the permitting process. So as long as they have a licensed electrician come out, they can just get the job done. That removes a barrier. It's not only a cost, it's a time.
It's a barrier, but I think it's greater than that. I think you have to change the mindset. There needs to be more of a public awareness process going on in this, and why it's been. I think we've started off pretty well with it, but I think it really needs to be stepped up a bit. I'm sure that some gas stations would do that, but a lot of them, they're certainly going to get pushback from the industry itself. You're basically, it's like going into a candy store that only sells candy and says, you got to sell ice cream too, and the guy that's selling the candy isn't going to be too happy about that because he loses profit margin.
Well, at least you didn't say you have to sell celery. So
you're right. No, but my point is, I think we have to change. I think there's a lot of awareness that has to take place as well. I think we have to change the mindset altogether. There's people that are still resistant to, they look at it as that many of these ideas are flaky, and they're not. They're more sound. You just have to change that mindset.
Yeah, and I think that supply and demand economics will drive some of this. We're at the early stages. Actually, New Jersey is actually far behind in its infrastructure for electric vehicles. And so with the infrastructure package that came, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there is a lot of funding slated. And if the administration can be aggressive in putting a map together next week, and then by August, putting together some really good plans, we can start to bring home that investment and catch up with other states, because it's going to make a difference into the future. And with gas prices rising, with what happened in Ukraine, searches on Google for electric vehicles skyrocketed. People want to switch to something that's more stable. You'll save the old days $1,000 a year on fuel, same distance traveled over a fossil fuel car with electric, and with the incentives for up to $5,000 back and no sales tax. They're starting to get competitive with the ICE counterparts. I would even say they are, because of those steps, but the infrastructure is going to be a big piece. So Susan Doward asked a question.
Well, before you go to that, there's an interesting little tidbit for, I'm sure most of the people on here are aware of this, but it is interesting that the department has stated that over the next 5 years, New Jersey will receive about $1 billion in funding under the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. So there is money on the horizon, and it's about, it's really about how to spend it at that point.
That's right. That's the infrastructure package. They have a couple things they need to do to get that money in, and it's going to be important. I think along the turnpike there's some charging, but it's going to, as the amount of cars grow, there's going to need to be more. There's no doubt.
Right.
So Susan Doward asked a question with regard. This is a bill that had strong bipartisan support in the Assembly, in the Senate last year. It passed. Assemblyman McKeon is a sponsor, and it has to do with low carbon concrete. A lot of carbon is released in the production of concrete, and there are versions that can actually not contribute to climate change as much as other versions. And so what the legislation was seeking to do was to make that a priority in the government spending, and also help to fuel a marketplace so others can come along on that. And are you familiar with the legislation, and what do you think the prospects are? Because it's sort of a revenue neutral solution, and it will really have a meaningful impact on our climate production. Our greenhouse gas production.
First of all, John is a shining star on the environmental committee. He's really great. And this issue, he's very much involved with. There's just a need to move forward with some of this stuff, and I know there's a bill out there that's I think it's either been posted or getting ready to be posted that addresses it.
Definitely. And we've been very supportive. We had a number of webinars on it, and we're happy to talk more. I think would have a great impact and show New Jersey's leadership. And there's no doubt construction will continue in our state, hopefully more upwards than outwards, so we can keep our forests intact, and we can redevelop places where there's a vacant lot or a building that's not really used as much. That's really
smart growth. Address some of that. Transit villages, Rahway was a transit village. We had increased our ridership here, in Rahway. A lot of the development that took place in our town was in the central business district. 30% of the town lives or 10% of the town lives in the central business district. There's 30,000 people in Rahway in 3.8 square miles, and 10% of them live in that central business district. Now, the only difference that's changed that dynamic a little bit is actually the age of communication. When all of this was started, so many people were commuting into Manhattan and different places. And now a lot of people are working either totally remotely or partially remotely, so even that is dwindling a little bit in terms of, I think that, a lot of people are just out of practical economics and moving to areas, like Rahway and other towns that have built around train stations. You still have that access into, either whether it's the River Line from Trenton to Burlington, down to Camden. You're starting to see some growth on that. That was slower than the Northeast corridor, which is the line here. But I just think it's a natural progression of things. Economics prevail. It's cheaper for people to be environmentally sound, than it had been at one point. And transportation is a great piece of that. It takes a lot of cars off the road.
And it's a huge source of pollution. Almost half of the pollution in our air comes from transportation. And so if we can get people to use public transportation, we get them
and
to
electric cars, you got a good start. And then, things develop over, mother invention, it just tends to feed itself. People will be more likely to look for more cost-effective ways of doing things that are environmentally sound.
So you have a couple pieces of legislation. One has to do with packaging that's appropriate, which is a great way to reduce waste and seems like a no-brainer for the shipping costs, right? Because you pay by price. And I always remember going to UPS and they measure it because it takes up space in the truck. And that also is a factor. So I would love you to talk a little bit about that. And another piece that I know there's a lot of interest for us and among our partners on what's called the Green Amendment, the Constitutional Amendment for Environmental Bill of Rights. And if you could tell us a little about those efforts. And I think everyone here is a big environmental supporter. We'd love to know what we can do to help. It does take the public, it takes elected officials like yourself who are committed to environmental protection and organizations to help connect the dots between those two to, really get things moving. How can we help with those two initiatives on boxes and amending the Constitution, which is a big, heavy lift in the state? It doesn't happen every day.
Well, packaging is, in a lot of cases, it's such overkill. You try to open a package at home sometimes, and it's like there's a box inside of a box,
And you need scissors, and you're thinking you're going to cut your finger.
No, I think a lot of this is practical stuff, and I think groups like these are they're helpful. They're their input. We're not really experts on any of this. We're here to implement the bills. It's most of the input comes from people like yourselves that are engaged in the process. We're here just to steer the ship and bring these to, we're here to do two things: to understand the need and then help find the solutions and then deliver the solutions, to get it implemented at some point, So I'd be interested to see what everybody has to say or any direct questions. I'd be more than happy to try to answer. I don't claim to have the answers to everything, but this helps me in the process as well.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that is like, how can we help pass that bill? If there are folks that want to get involved, what would be a useful way for them to voice their support?
Well, I think, look, basically the function works pretty simply in the sense that you got to get the bill to the floor, So, my job is to see, not to take a futile exercise in things that aren't going to happen, but things that are. So if there's issues that you're trying to move forward, we need to know about them. And get the support. You have some great people that are much brighter minds than mine. John McEwen, for one, I lean on him for a lot of different things. John is so inbred into this that he's a wealth of information. So it's really about getting things that are going to make sense and that are not so far on the edge that you can't win support of it, because at the end of the day you need 41 votes and to get it to the next thing you need 21 on the other side. So it's and then that also is putting pressure on the areas in this, the two-party system is wonderful in a lot of ways, but it has some drawbacks as well. You need to be able to find enough of votes to get it to pass. So sometimes you need help from both sides of the aisle. And I can say this about New Jersey: it's not as dog and cat as it may appear to a lot of people. There's a lot of guys on both sides of the aisles on different issues that are important to different districts that help carry the ball across the line. So it's really about being active, the groups being active and interacting with the legislators, to let them know their opinions and how they feel. I mean, I've had conversations with people who have come in to talk to me and, brought up a point that I never had heard in the dialogue of a discussion before. And it was like amazing to me, because it's almost like, geez, this is such a basic concept here that everybody's kind of missing with all of the frills around it. But I can't underscore the importance of people like yourselves that are engaged in the process and staying up on there. There's very few people. I shouldn't say very few. There's fewer people that are dug into the sand and can't be moved. Than there are people that will listen to logic and move forward. I know my whole career was kind of based around that kind of thing, just because of the circumstances that unfolded as I got involved in politics. Mm-hmm. So I just encourage it.
So the translation, really, that put a finer point on it too, is it's good to reach out to your legislator. They want to hear from you. It's Absolutely. A two-way street, and you don't know what you don't know till you hear it. And if it's something they already know about, then you can put a finer point on it and work together. It's not some inaccessible.
It shouldn't be. If it is, there's something wrong.
Yeah,
but it shouldn't be. Yeah.
So definitely take note of that, because I think a lot of people get nervous about reaching out or asking for a meeting and say, someone's not listening to me. Well, are you talking directly to your elected official? And yeah, if they're not available, that's an issue unto itself. Yeah. So we have a good question here. This has been something that's coming up all over the place. As we've talked about packaging, we're ordering, at least in the pandemic, and continuing to order more things online, which means they get delivered by a very friendly driver from Amazon or UPS or FedEx or some other last mile delivery. And with it, a proliferation of warehouses going up in communities, ruining roadways, rumbling, site issues. I know the legislature passed a bill that requires them to be solar ready, but not have solar on them. California says all warehouses should have, all buildings, new buildings should have solar. But that's sort of a separate issue from what we're seeing as warehouse sprawl. We're seeing whole forests cut down to put in a warehouse. It's not even a redevelopment issue.
It is a redevelopment issue as well. I mean,
not always.
I'm pretty familiar with this one because I work in Burlington City, and next to it is Florence, which is the queen of warehouse space. There's 28 million square feet of rooftops in Burlington, which is what gave us the idea for the solar rooftop thing. It's right on the Burlington River. It's the reason it's there. I mean, logistics are an interesting science. It's there because it's between two bridges, the Burlington-Bristol Bridge, which is $4, and the Turnpike Bridge, which is on the other side of it. So, transportation tends to be guided by the point of least resistance, going from point A to Z, not in a zigzag, as direct as you can. And, so in Burlington and in Florence, you wound up with, when I first went down there, I was like, why are all these warehouses there? It's like you get off at 1:30 and it's just this complex. It's just absolutely amazing. And the reason is because of the transportation and the moving of products. So there's 28 million. To give you an idea, the Amazon building in Burlington is 1/3 of a mile long. It's almost inconceivable. They started building these warehouses at 250 square feet, 250,000 square feet to 450,000 was the big monster. Now it's a million square feet. They actually, in some of these cases, they have golf carts that go from one side to the other, but they have special engines in them to go faster so they can get to the other side quicker. And it's a catch-22. We're a consumer economy. We're based on that, and so you have all these products, and what's the latest, greatest, best new thing has always been the American, I don't know, I don't even know what term to use there, but it's always been our way of life, So it's the evolution of it is that the warehousing space to store the stuff tends to be in these areas where transportation meets populations, and that's why you're running into it. And when the issue came up of the solar powered roofs, it seemed like, well, the roofs were there anyway, and people, they were starting to put a lot of the solar stuff on farmland and things like that, and even environmentalists didn't like the way it looks. It's not a very attractive way. So I guess it's the lesser of the evils until we can figure out a better way to provide energy to the amount of people on the face of the earth. So I think that's why it's evolving the way that it is. I don't know if that brings any clarity to it, but
yeah, no, I mean, certainly it makes sense if you have a rooftop, and it's there and it collects sun and provide power both to the place under it, in this case a warehouse, a Target or whatever. That makes sense. I think what we're really seeing is just an explosion of warehouses, and sometimes Julia Summers, who is the chair, so I have to say that, of New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, she mentions one in Warren County on a 2-lane country road. It has no shoulders. It's 10 miles from 78, 12 miles from Route 80. That's not like in a natural place. That's a hub. It's not like you just hop off, kind of move product around, and put it on a different truck, and then boom, hop back on. 10 miles is a significant amount for a small road. And there are instances like this up and down our state, from the very northern mountains to the southern shores. And, would regional planning make sense where, we're leaving it up to the businesses to decide, and that's fine, but they may over decide or overdevelop, overcompensate.
Or the communities often don't have restrictions of you can't spot zone them out. So you have to create an area for warehousing. Not every community can even accommodate the warehousing. So it tends to be, you got to watch those areas of the state that are near interstates and exchanges that have the access, because it's, that's where they're going. So those communities really need to sharpen their pencil on their local zoning laws, what they have, because if they don't provide for it, they're going to lose the challenge, if it comes up, and these guys know that, so the encouragement should, in New Jersey, we're a little more sophisticated than other places because we've been dumped on so much that that so many municipalities, people wind up getting into office because of something that happens that people don't like, and so but it's really about zoning and watching the zoning in the areas and providing the zoning to provide the services that are necessary without overbearing them on areas. Now, I'm sure, like in I can't, just from the top of my head, Florence, New Jersey, for instance, 28 million square feet. It's an enormous amount of, I think it's the highest density that I'm aware of in New Jersey, other than, well, maybe up in, when you think of density, you almost close an eye up to, really highly populated areas of the state because it's there, Elizabethport, Northport, places like that. And they're already developed, but places that have been developing, that, that's where you got to keep an eye on it to make sure that it's not overdone.
Yeah, and that's what, Tim said in the chat here too, with regard to like, tying the transportation spending and the investments into, you know, putting these warehouses in places that are not rural or environmentally sensitive. That seems like the beginning. If, as in the interim, I do know like many communities are having the issue in the legal process. Mine is one of them, where you can't just change your zone and then they can come and sue and then they can come in and and so it has to. There's just a lot of precedent setting. There may be a need, and we don't have the answer for that right now, for some new tools if people feel like they're maxed out. Like I don't, we're not going to call this warehouse township. We feel like having a YMCA is important. That means we need children, which means we need houses. We're not going to be all warehouses. We're going to be residential houses too. So I think we probably will need to be looking into some new tools if things keep up at this pace. Potentially, I think it's likely from that perspective. We're getting a lot of questions at the end. We only have 2 minutes left. It's hard to pick. So let me just ask you this. Probably the best thing to do and sort of round out is just again extend our appreciation for the work you do, for making yourself available for this conversation. You certainly have a long history and experience as a couple decades as mayor that you bring into your role in the assembly and as chair of the environment committee. Many of us, we care deeply about the environment. So however we can be helpful, we want to be helpful and make.
Feel free to contact our office. Sometimes we wonder where the heck everybody is, I know these are issues out there, and I don't mind. I actually enjoy the interaction with it. So don't feel shy. I'm not,
Awesome. And anything else you want to close us out with? We have a number of folks here.
Another question if they have them. I don't mind answering questions.
Yeah, let me see what we got here. So there was a question here. So we talked a little bit about electric vehicles. And clearly that's important because there's no emissions from the tailpipe of an electric vehicle. And they're 80% as efficient using the current electricity as far as emissions go than internal combustion engine. But we don't have medium and large trucks available right now at scale. So one way to get pollution out of our air is to retrofit some of the trucks we have, or all of them, quite frankly. And that would be through, adding better catalytic processes that reduce pollution, particularly the most hazardous parts that come from the tailpipe, the nitrous oxide and the sulfur byproducts. Are there any thoughts, or have you seen anything in the legislature in investing in rapid retrofitting for those medium and heavy duty vehicles?
I haven't heard anything about retrofitting. There's been, call it, for lack of a better term, dreaming about, fleets become, I keep waiting to hear, you don't hear anything about trucks. I don't know if it's the industry itself that's not interested in it. It just doesn't seem to be on the radar screen right now. I don't know what the reason for that is, but I would think that, I think a lot of it has to do with the, it's easy to pull up to a gas station or a diesel station and get gas. I mean, that's the norm for the last 40 years or so. I think we need to start building the infrastructure. And I think at least from the planning stages, the legislatures have to start looking at, we need to take the first investments and steps in doing that, encouraging it, whether it's through incentives or outright building the infrastructure. But I think if you really believe that this is the answer to or a good portion of part of the solution at best, that we should start investing into it, and we've had some conversations about this internally, but I think it needs to come to another step. I don't think it's going away. I think it is something that's going to evolve, and I think we're in the initial stage about it's like dating, well, you can't say that about me. That's nice hair or something, but but there's a process here, is what I'm trying to say, that you need, we really need to take a better look, a harder look at how to implement the next level of this.
Yeah, and that question came from Dave Pringle, who's here too. And I think there, around the ports particularly, there's a number of opportunities. Some of that big stuff, it's going to be a while before we can get it all transitioned over to the electric. Although the ports, they're stable, they stay in one place, but the trucks that go in and out, the retrofits can really be a great entrance.
I'd like to hear more from the groups, like Dave, the different groups. Sometimes they know more about this than we do. When you're elected as a legislator, you're expected to know everything about everything going on. I know about how to create a tax, a better tax structure in a city. But I think a lot of this information has to come out of the advocates for it as well. So I encourage them to contact me. I don't find that a nuisance. I find that as an assistance. We need help. We deal with problems one day at a time. And this is a long-term issue here. So the environmental groups, I encourage them to be more active and don't feel like you're pestering me. I enjoy doing this, and I'd love to help find some of the solutions to some of these things. So,
well, thank you. That's a great last word. I know you have a great staff. Skylar put in the chat how folks can get in touch with you. It is asmkennedy@njledge.org, and as well a phone number if people actually still know how to dial. It's 732-943-2660. I don't know if it accepts text messages, which is
it's my cell. No, I'm only kidding.
Here comes your cell. But we really appreciate your time. Thanks for making time this evening. To everyone who joined us, thank you very much. And to our co-sponsors, which I have to pull up again, which I will mention when I get back up to that spot in the piece: American Littoral Society, the Land Conservancy of New Jersey, the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, New Jersey Audubon, the Watershed Institute, and New Jersey Sierra Club. Thank you guys for your work today to get folks out. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going. And I think you're going to have a lot of takers to reach out to you, and look forward to that work together. That's so important for us to do.
Looking forward to working with all these groups. I sincerely mean that. Thank you very much.
Take care.